It's the 40th anniversary of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. I got this from the Ministry of Labor's website, and this was the advertisement that they used to advertise the little green book. And by the way, I'm old enough to know what was before the green book. There's my green.
Archives, from your archives.
From my archives. I even have the Bill 70 that it came from. So I dug that out of the basement in the clinic. Anyway, it's been mentioned already. It came from the Ham Commission, which came from the Elliott Lake strike. James Ham went to Sweden, and he was impressed with the practice of industrial democracy at that time. And he brought some of those ideas back, and that was how he came to his 3 R's. Also, I went to a IAPA conference way back when, and I heard him speak, and he quoted, the one quote I wrote down verbatim was, "Law is the conscience of those who have none." And I'd be amazed to see if people would say that today. But it was a different time and a different flavor. His view of the IRS was that you had the right to know, participate, and refuse, but participation was defined as having the knowledge, the contributive responsibility, and the direct responsibility. And the worker auditors, which he became the health and safety reps, only had the first 2, whereas everybody else, workers management and the MOL, had all the other 3. Now, his view was that workers had to respond to incidents, but they shouldn't stop there. These incidents were just a symptom of something deeper underlying that was wrong. If a fire hydrant keeps getting blocked, well, you don't just unblock it. You find out why people are storing things there. Is it because there's not enough storage, et cetera, the underlying issue. And so he saw health and safety reps as auditors of the health and safety internal responsibility system. They weren't the IRS, they were the auditors of the IRS. So then we talked about technical legal, so I won't go into those. So LOARC did a paper and came out with this booklet, which you have. And today, health and safety, I think, from my opinion, is gridlock. People are bogged down with technical, legal, bureaucratic activities. The legal interpretations, when the Act first came out, people interpreted according to the spirit of the law. And now it's been narrowed down so much. You still have the same letters, but they mean a whole lot less than they did back then. And WMIS was originally an opportunity for health and safety training, and it's been reduced to a short online fact transfer activity. When we started WMIS, I contacted Don Fraser, who was with the Workers Center then, and we trained workers to teach other workers, and it was an 8-hour program that we bought into. My management would only allow me to do 4 hours, so I had to squeeze it down. But now it doesn't really teach they've taken all the knowledge activism out of the program, and it's just a bureaucratic checkbox thing. At the mining review recently, they looked at the IRS, and there were some questions raised whether the joint health and safety was a hindrance to the IRS. It takes away individual responsibility and puts it in a committee, and they thought that was wrong. As older health and safety activists retire, it's difficult to get young people to step up. And the new working relationships, the precarious, the temps, etc., make it all that much more difficult. So we're looking at new ways of getting the Health and Safety Committee out of being bogged down in bureaucratic gridlock, and with new relationships, new technology. The knowledge transfer framework, Alec talked about the little wheel, that's what it looks like, and there were posters and things like that. But rather than gearing the information to how many facts can we transfer from here via electronics into somebody's head, you should be asking, what do you want people to do? And so that's why Val said, 5 things to do about noise or things like that. Let's see. I got way too many slides, so. But the idea is you try to make it simple for somebody to do what you want them to do. And it's the whole idea. If all you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And it used to be, what do you want them to know? Education is not power. Power is power, Bob Sass said way back when. And that's the strategy. You work backwards from the action to the tool. So you figure out what you want done, and you pick the appropriate tool to do that. But a lot of health and safety seems to be the other way. Let's put out a fact sheet about respirable hazards or something like that, and then thinking that this will motivate people to do something. But it doesn't work that way. So what are the values that we want to embody in the tool and the strategy? And Andy King talked about when he was at the Steelworkers, they used to do an annual survey of the health and safety reps, asking what is your major factor. And so some of these came from there. But also he was saying, when did you start, the 70s or 80s? Late 80s. And what was the number one thing every time? Stress. So we've known about it all that time, and how long has it taken us to do something for it? So we've tried to create a new tool with the help of the CCUHS for reporting workplace hazards. This app is broken down into 12 categories of hazards, and you rate it on a scale from concerned, annoyed, to interferes with the job getting done. It's asking you to report work exposure-related symptoms, identify the source of the hazard, and give suggestions for eliminating or reducing the hazard. And really, if you get this much of information from a single person, and that gets to the Health and Safety Committee, that's worth it in itself. You've probably already identified a few things. This came from a list that I developed for the steelworkers about 10 years ago, and we had a one-pager that we gave to health and safety reps to hand out to workers to fill out. With the genius of the CCUHS programmers, we also have the ability to take pictures of the hazard, and you can draw circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back of each one explaining what each one is. Those of you who are old enough to know that that's a line from Alice's Restaurant. The results can be emailed to the supervisor, the health and safety rep, or the MOL, or whoever you have an email address for. And it's a tool to facilitate really the internal responsibility system. It's to get the information moving from workers to the people responsible to fix the problem. And this is what the app looks like. It's available in Android Store right now. Apple Store is worried about the intellectual property. How many different ways can you ask whether it's too loud or you have a problem with the noise? So there are some of the 12 lists of things. You're asked to rate it on the scale of 1 to 5. It asks for the source, solutions, and symptoms. And for instance, here's one. Are there any concerns about the exposures to radiation and how they're managed? Well, one thing is the Wi-Fi is not strong enough. Recommendation, or what does it cause? What symptoms? It causes frustration and stress. The solution is to get stronger Wi-Fi. I didn't make this one up myself. This one actually came from a union survey that we did. And one of the persons in the survey was worried about Wi-Fi, but not for the reasons we thought, but because it wasn't strong enough. And that's what I've learned from doing about 500 questionnaires in workplaces, different workplaces, that the creativity of the answers is always bigger than the creativity of those who made these questions. Another one that I have is how well are dangerous chemicals? And so when we got the app, I went to my office and I looked at what's in my office and took pictures and things like that. And so I have asbestos, paraformaldehyde, HCl, hydrochloric acid, and a very strong cleaner. See, everybody comes to us with their problems and they leave a sample of their problem on my desk. So here are some of the chemicals under my desk with circles and arrows and boxes. And here's the asbestos. Notice it's in a plastic bag. And what's the solution? Of course, wearing a mask is the solution. So there I am at my desk wearing a mask. And then you do the health and safety. Well, you realize that there's too much clutter in my office, obviously, and so I can use the picture and recycle it again for another health hazard. So then you get the results, and for each of the 12 items, it's rated. The little Canadian flag tells you what the rating, the Canadian average is, so you can compare whether you're worse or better than the Canadian average. And here's the scale that it's measured on. It also, if you click on the item, you can get some ideas on how to deal with that hazard. And also, you can print out the results in a PDF format. And here's the PDF of my chemicals in my office, and I sent that to Valerie, so she knows about it. And so she...
Tell the fire department.
Well, the solution is wear a mask, so I'm not too worried. And we also have a link to additional resources, and here's where obviously the CCOHS has all kinds of resources, and so it links to the different hazards, their resource page on that. Again, the other thing is who's qualified to identify hazards in a workplace? Well, I've used the Sobain method for many years. It's called screening, observation, and screening, observation, analysis, and expertise. I can't even read my own stuff. Anyway, it's a kind of a pyramid, which is based on the workers are the ones who are working with it, so they know best. And if they get stuck, the health and safety committee, supervisors, that level is there to support them, identifying and solving problems. And if the health and safety committee and supervisors have problems, then you call in people who are trained, like hygienists, ergonomists, people like that, to help them out. And then if they get stuck, you need an expert. But the whole issue is that the problem is defined at the bottom level. So if people are complaining about headaches in this room, you don't go and get a hygienist to measure carbon dioxide or oxygen or whatever, and they say, oh, the oxygen is fine. Well, that wasn't the problem. The problem was headaches. So if you've wiped off the fact that there's enough oxygen in the room, fine. Keep going. You haven't solved the problem yet. So the problem is defined at the lowest level, and the other levels are there to support the workers who need to resolve the issue. And that's where LOARC comes in. And we've talked about that. The CCOHS, I want to recognize their role in all of this, because back in the early 80s, when I started working as a hygienist in a company, I had no resources. I couldn't subscribe to journals and stuff like that. So once a month I would go to the CCOHS, and they had free photocopying at that time. It's no longer free. And I used to, once a month, go through all the Foundry magazines and health and safety and photocopy the articles that I needed. By the way, this part of the presentation actually came from a presentation I gave at the CCOHS a few years ago about some ideas, and that I recycled again for Andy later on for his course. But at that time, your paper articles were gold. You know, that's what you shared with fellow activists and things like that. You looked into your file, and that's where you kept your stuff. And then later on, they had the discs, and but once Google came, all that information was unlimited and immediate for everyone. So especially OSH answers, I'm going to skip this. These are some databases I found online that are very useful for compensation reps and health and safety reps. You can trace hazards from the health effect back to the chemical, or from the chemical to find out what health effects are happening. But these are all available online. Another thing that we worked with the CCOHS is taking this survey, which did a body map for people's aches and pains due to musculoskeletal problems, which was 2 discomfort scales, a frequency and a severity. And there was a scoring system that told us how likely people would be once they scored in these boxes to seek medical attention. And based on that, you could draw a map of a group, and that's what's in Painpoint, the app. There are also apps available. NIOSH has a lifting equation app that's free. And OCal also has, Mike Sonne put this together a while ago, and he's no longer with us, unfortunately. Although, fortunately, we got Daryl instead. And where's Daryl? Oh, there he is. He's also familiar with these tools. But these are all online tools that you can use to evaluate lifts, the setup of workstations, things like that. With air quality, we were using a survey. We've been using it since the early 90s, so we've used it in many workplaces. And with air quality, you start with the symptoms, and then how you feel in your workplace depends on all these factors. So it's one of the most complicated problems you can try to resolve. And there are many equipment that you can use, and even we found one that was reducing the cost of measuring carbon dioxide from a $5,000 machine to a sensor that you could hold and connect to your phone, and it was going to be about $50 to $100. However, somebody bought it out and shut them down, and they're no longer on the net. And probably the people who sold the machines. However, what's the gold standard when you evaluate air quality? It's keeping the occupants from being preoccupied by the air quality so they can get their job done. And that's the same thing with thermal discomfort. You want to create an environment where people don't notice the temperature and don't notice the air quality, and it doesn't get in the way of doing their work. And we've used a survey from Sweden, and I think we've done it probably in about 200 workplaces by now. And we compare their results to reference results. And so you can see how well your group is doing compared to buildings that don't have air quality problems. And we do the same with perception. And we translated that into AirAssess, which is an app that asks those questions and uses the diagnosis that we've built up from our database to interpret the results. In response to the heat stroke deaths back in 2000, we created the heat stress tool. We had it already, but all of a sudden the CAE, oh, here's Ted Haynes. Welcome. Ted was one of the people who started the very first clinic in 1981 with the steelworkers, and Murray also worked in the early, so he has even more years in clinics than I do, and Ted was there at the beginning, so welcome, Ted. So we had this tool already, but the CAW, now Unifor at that time, said, you know, we need something easy that workers can use to measure heat stress, because the WBGT is just too complicated. And so we figured out how to translate WBGT into Humidex that people understood, and created this tool. NIOSH and OSHA also have heat stress apps that are available, but they're in Fahrenheit, and they're also according to their standards. Noise, we did a lot of work with the noise. We had a task force from ODAP that worked on it. We looked at apps, and the noise regulation, when it came out in 2015, had this wonderful formula. And so what we did is we took that and made a spreadsheet so people could just put their numbers in and do the online calculation. We also tested some of the apps. Some of them are terrible, but some of them are pretty good. NIOSH, we interacted with the people who did the NIOSH one, and we did some testing and fed that back to them, and they made some tweaks to it. So it's an app that can measure noise fairly reliably, but only on the iPhone. There are many other tools and services available that we put together. There's audiometric apps, so you can do an audiometric test on yourself. It even gives you the equivalent of how old your ears are. There's reverberation apps. You have to bang on the table and make a loud noise, but it can calculate or estimate the reverberation. There's quite a few of them. Most of them cost something, though. There's a whole body vibration app. So, and then we have Kosh Essentials, which is a non-measurement exposure assessment technique, which is based on qualitative. There are some very good quantitative databases. One on welding fumes. You fill in what type of welding, how long you're doing it, whether you're wearing PPE and that, and then it gives you the results with 95% confidence limits. You can even specify the year in which the welding took place. CanGEM, Canadian, what's GEM stand for? Job Exposure Matrix, thank you. So you can dial any job in there, and you can evaluate how strong or how much exposure they have to the various chemicals. And this is based on, I think, 35,000 interviews, or maybe it could be 350,000. I don't know. In Montreal, they've been doing a case control study for many years, and they had all these interviews with people in various jobs, and they put that all on a database, and that's available online. There's tools to predict exposure based on how much you're using, what shape the workplace is in, and things like that. Activists often ask if their exposures are below the exposure limit, is it safe? Because the assumption is it's legal, then it's safe. But the fact that exposure limits keep coming down over years should give you a clue that it's not necessarily safe. And for instance, we go online and we can find other exposure, for instance, for asbestos. Our standard is 0.1 fiber per cc. In Holland, they just recently did a completely systematic review and a risk assessment of what it should be, and they came up with 0.002, which is a whole lot less than what we're doing. Tapping into social media networks. Sue talked about that. But what activities are most effective? And there was a study done in Sweden about different ways of getting the message out about noise into the workplace. And their conclusion was an inspector going in and writing an order is the most effective way of reducing decibels in the workplace. So I thought, I always like to throw that one out at the Ministry of Labor when they're trying to get us to carry the ball to reduce noise. And finally, the mental injury tool group, we're 10 years. 2009 is when we began. And based on Terry's napkin, we've developed our matrix into quite a complex thing. At the individual level, the group level, the organization, the societal. I also put in sometimes a sector level, a fifth group. But the point is that health and safety today is trying to focus on the individual responsibility. And then The organizational facts are trying to force the individual to take responsibility for themselves. But when you do this, you're missing the group. The group really needs to work together on the problem and figure out a way to solve it. The organization can make policies and stuff like that, and you can put them on the wall, and they look pretty, and the Ministry of Labor can tick off their box that there's a policy. But really, this is where it's made real. And you can have a lousy policy, but if you have a good group, they can really make it effective. And if you can have a great policy, but if the group doesn't accept it and doesn't own it and doesn't engage on it, it's a useless policy. So the group really is the missing link often in getting the problems done. We published our results from our survey in the American Journal of Industrial Medicine, and we paid about $3,000, I think, was it, for open access. So please go and access it, make our money worth. We're also involved in the COPSUC International Network, and we're probably going to host the 2021 international group here. It's a very small group, 40 to 50 people, but we also tested the reliability and validity of the survey in 6 different countries, and that's just been published also. And the ISO in March will release a draft of an international standard that will deal with occupational health and safety management, psychological health and safety in the workplace. It was interesting because I was talking to the woman who chairs it, and in Canada, our standard used to say psychosocial, and then before the standard was released, they went through the whole document and removed the word psychosocial and substituted psychological. And I was talking to the woman who leads it, and she was thinking of doing the opposite. So I told her the story about Canada, and she said, "I'm so glad that you told me that." So it might be called a psychosocial standard instead of a psychological one. We'll have to wait and see. We have our website with our tools. Again, we want, oh, I got the wrong presentation. I had all your names on there, sorry. App downloads. Your app was 10,000 something. Ours is 7,000, so we're not doing too bad. And now the new app does the same thing as the old one. We have the workplace stress assess. We've had over 400 people donate their results to the national database, which is probably about 1/10 of the people who actually access it. The workplace edition, we had a lot of interest and a lot of people created accounts, but a very few of them actually created surveys, and of those who did, a lot of them were experimental. So the number back at the beginning of the year when I was looking at it was about 15 to 20 real workplace. I think it's at least double that now. It seems to have picked up. And also this year is the first year that we're getting the first inquiry from an employer rather than from the union. So we're finally starting to break into the union. We're using the ILO checkpoints, but they have an app themselves that lets you use the checkpoint document in itself. But there are lots of other things we can do, and this is where I was pitching to the CCOHS. You know, you can measure lighting of magnetic fields. There's the mold logic that you could create into an app. There's all kinds of exposure symptoms and documentation that you could link together. Shift work, providing advice for people on shift work on how to manage it. We're still trying to get the heat stress and cold stress out there. My son created a prototype of the heat stress, but we still haven't connected to get that out. And the CAREX, OCRC, occupational risk analysis, you could put some of those into an app online. There are other risk assessment toolboxes internationally that could be adapted to the Canadian thing. And there are many more things that we can do, but the problem usually is not a lack of ideas, but a lack of people who are willing to carry these ideas and take them into the workplace. Like George Boddick was really the person who took the heat stress program, and he put me on a speaking tour of all these conferences. He arranged for me to meet with the ministry and pitch it to them and things like that. Ocow, our clinic is just 7 or 8 people. We don't have the Sue Freemans and people who go out there and do the talking. So unless we can plug into the unions and get them to make the connections to get our materials out, lots of good ideas, but we need you really to bridge the gap from an idea to something that's useful in the workplace. So, thanks. I guess now we can have lunch.